The early morning sun cast long shadows across the parched plains near the ancient town of Cannae, situated in southeastern Italy. On that fateful day in 216 BC, two of antiquity's most formidable forces prepared to collide in a confrontation that would echo through centuries of military scholarship. The Roman Republic and the Carthaginian army, led by the brilliant Hannibal Barca. Cannae would forever be known as one of the most devastating defeats in Roman history, a testament to Hannibal's strategic genius and the ferocious will of his soldiers. Yet, the road to Cannae did not begin here in these dusty fields, with two armies poised for battle. It started years earlier, in the aftermath of the First Punic War, when the seeds of rivalry and vengeance were sown between Rome and Carthage. Carthage was a maritime power, its empire built on the pillars of trade and naval dominance in the Western Mediterranean. Rome, by contrast, had traditionally been a land-based republic, expanding across the Italian peninsula through a mix of alliances and conquests. Their first conflict, known as the First Punic War, 264 to 241 BC, had upended the status quo. Rome had forced Carthage out of Sicily and exacted severe reparations. Bitter at these terms, many Carthaginians believed the peace settlement was more akin to a deep wound, one that demanded redress. Among these Carthaginians was a young Hannibal, born into a family of military prestige. His father, Hannibal Barca, had led Carthaginian forces in Sicily and later shifted his ambitions to Iberia, Spain, forging a new power base for Carthage and instilling in his son a profound animosity toward Rome. When Hamilcar died, command passed to Hasdrubal the Fair and then to Hannibal himself. From his youth, Hannibal had sworn an oath of hatred against Rome, a vow to challenge the rising republic that had humbled Carthage. By the time he assumed leadership of the Carthaginian forces in Iberia, Hannibal had already exhibited a bold and innovative mind for warfare. He expanded Carthage's territorial claims in Iberia, capturing mines of silver and forging alliances with local tribes. This not only enriched Carthage, but also provided a critical recruitment pool for infantry and cavalry. Rome, always wary of Carthaginian revival, began demanding that Hannibal not cross certain boundaries, notably the river Ebro, a treaty line supposed to keep Carthaginian power in check. Tensions boiled over when Hannibal besieged Saguntum, an ally of Rome. The city fell after fierce resistance, and the Second Punic War erupted in 218 BC. Hannibal knew that the war's outcome would hinge on more than naval skirmishes. Rome, by this time, had a formidable fleet, but was also a powerful land force that could field multiple legions across various theaters. Determined to bring the fight to Rome's doorstep, Hannibal embarked on one of the most legendary feats in military history, crossing the Alps. Marching from Iberia with a diverse army, infantry from North Africa and Iberia, cavalry from Numidia, Iberia, and Gaul, plus war elephants, he set out on a perilous trek. The journey was fraught with perils beyond the reach of standard military planning: steep passes, avalanches, frigid conditions, and hostile Gaulish tribes. Men and animals died in droves, but Hannibal's iron will drove the survivors forward. When the remnants of his army descended into the lush plains of northern Italy, they found themselves behind Roman lines, poised to strike where the Republic least expected. This bold strategy confounded the Romans. Few had considered that an enemy might cross such formidable natural barriers in order to reach the Roman heartland. Eager to protect their dominion, Roman generals mobilized legions for immediate engagement. The first major encounter came that same year at the Ticinus River, followed by a larger confrontation at the Trebia River. In both cases, Hannibal's cunning, especially his mastery of cavalry tactics, caught the Romans off balance. Roman armies, typically reliant on heavy infantry formations, struggled to cope with Hannibal's swift cavalry maneuvers and strategic ambushes. Even winter did not halt Hannibal's momentum. In 217 BC, at Lake Trasimene, he orchestrated one of the most successful ambushes in ancient warfare. Under the cover of morning fog, his hidden troops sprang upon the Roman legions, marching along a narrow road by the lake's shore, annihilating them in one of the largest ambushes of recorded antiquity. This series of Carthaginian victories eroded Roman morale and elevated Hannibal's reputation as a master strategist. But Rome was not a city-state easily broken by defeats. The Senate took drastic measures, appointing Quintus Fabius Maximus as dictator. Fabius adopted a new approach: avoid direct battle with Hannibal, deny him resources, and harass Carthaginian foraging parties. This Fabian strategy, while prudent, was unpopular in Rome. The public and many in the Senate disliked the cautious approach, yearning for a swift, decisive engagement to restore Rome's honor. As soon as Fabius's term ended, power passed to newly elected consuls who embraced the more traditional Roman mindset of seeking open battle. In 216 BC, under the leadership of the consuls Lucius Aemilius Paulus and Gaius Terentius Varro, Rome mustered one of the largest armies in its history. Some historians estimate between 70,000 and 80,000 men. Their target? The Carthaginian camp near the town of Cannae, located along the Aufidus River in Apulia. Hannibal chose the site of Cannae with calculating insight. The surrounding plains offered ample room for cavalry maneuvers, and the proximity to the river provided a steady water source. By seizing a Roman supply depot in the region, Hannibal also cut off crucial provisions that the Romans needed. The stage was set for the confrontation that both sides believed would decide the war. Carthage had roughly half the numerical strength of Rome, perhaps around 40,000 infantry and 10,000 cavalry, though the exact figures are debated. Despite being outnumbered, Hannibal held an edge in cavalry quality, particularly his Numidian horsemen renowned for their speed and skill. As the Roman legions marched toward Cannae, an air of urgency permeated their ranks. The memory of Lake Trasimene, where Roman soldiers had been trapped and slaughtered, remained fresh. Yet the sheer size of their assembled force imbued them with confidence. Many believed that no cunning tactic could prevail against such overwhelming numbers. Paulus, the more cautious of the two consuls, wanted to avoid reckless engagement. Varro, however, was eager to bring Hannibal to heel in a direct fight. On the day of the battle, Varro had command and saw fit to line up the Roman forces in a deeper-than-usual formation, hoping that their massed infantry would smash through the Carthaginian center. In contrast, Hannibal arranged his forces with careful finesse. He placed his Iberian and Gallic infantry in a crescent formation at the center, knowing they would bear the brunt of the Roman assault. On the flanks, he stationed his most reliable African infantry, men equipped and trained similarly to Roman legionaries, and behind them, additional reserves ready to move as the situation demanded. His cavalry stood on the wings, the heavy Spanish and Gallic cavalry on one side, the agile Numidian horsemen on the other. With the sun rising, dust curling from the ground, and tension thick enough to taste, both armies steeled themselves for the cataclysm to come. Soon after Varro ordered the attack, the massive Roman infantry block surged forward. At first, the Carthaginian center bent under the pressure. The Iberians and Gauls, though fierce warriors, struggled against the disciplined thrust of Roman legions. Their lines gradually receded, forming a concave shape. To the Romans, it appeared as though they were driving their enemies back, as planned. But unknown to them, Hannibal's design was unfolding precisely as he intended. By allowing the center to yield in a controlled manner, Hannibal lured the Romans into a funnel. Meanwhile, on the flanks, the Carthaginian cavalry clashed with Roman horsemen. Hasdrubal commanded the Spanish and Gallic cavalry, launching a relentless attack on the Roman cavalry positioned on the Roman right wing, led by Paulus. After fierce fighting, Carthaginian cavalry gained the upper hand, forcing their opponents to retreat or be cut down. On the opposite flank, the Numidian cavalry adeptly skirmished, drawing the Roman allied cavalry into disarray. With both wings of Rome's cavalry quickly neutralized, the Carthaginian horsemen were free to maneuver. Hasdrubal led them in a swift sweep around the Roman rear, attacking the legions from behind. Meanwhile, the center of Hannibal's line continued to curve inward. As the Romans pressed deeper, they found themselves hemmed in on three sides. Then came the coup de grace. The African infantry on either side pivoted inward like closing gates, slamming into the Roman flanks. What had moments before felt like an advantage to the Romans, the supposed break in the Carthaginian center, was now a trap. Surrounded by Carthaginian forces on all sides, the Roman legions were compressed into a tight space where their superior numbers worked against them. Soldiers had no room to swing swords or maneuver. Panic spread like wildfire. By midday, the Roman army was effectively encircled. The scene was one of grim horror. Carthaginian soldiers methodically cut down their enemies, while the Roman center, now trapped, frantically tried to break free. Consul Paulus fought bravely, but was eventually slain. Varro, less cautious, survived by escaping the encirclement. For the Roman rank and file, there was no escape. The slaughter was relentless, continuing late into the day. Ancient sources report staggering casualties. Estimates vary, but many place the Roman dead at 50,000 or more, with another 10,000 or so captured. The Carthaginian losses, while not insignificant, were but a fraction in comparison. This massive defeat sent shockwaves through Rome. The city fell into mourning, anticipating that Hannibal might soon march on the capital itself. In the immediate aftermath, Roman allies in southern Italy wavered. Some defected to Carthage, believing Rome's power to be broken. Yet, despite the magnitude of his success, Hannibal did not proceed directly to lay siege to Rome. Various reasons have been suggested. He might have lacked sufficient siege equipment or feared a protracted siege without reinforcements. Carthage was far away, and while Hannibal's army was formidable in the field, capturing a fortified metropolis was another matter entirely. Instead, he moved to consolidate alliances in the Italian south, hoping to isolate Rome from her allies. Meanwhile, in Rome, the Senate refused to surrender. Despite the unimaginable scale of the loss, Roman resilience shone through. Legislators enacted emergency measures, freeing and arming slaves, raising new legions, and intensifying efforts to fortify the city. They also returned to the Fabian strategy: avoid pitched battles with Hannibal unless conditions were overwhelmingly favorable. For the remainder of the war, Hannibal would indeed roam the Italian peninsula, winning local engagements and expecting more cities to defect. However, a decisive victory that could deliver a final blow to Rome eluded him. Over time, Rome rebuilt its forces, opened new fronts, notably in Iberia and North Africa, and slowly strangled Carthage's ability to support Hannibal. Ultimately, the war concluded with Scipio Africanus's invasion of North Africa and Hannibal's defeat at Zama in 202 BC. Yet, even as Rome emerged triumphant, the Battle of Cannae took on a mythic resonance. Military theorists from the ancient world to modern times have studied Hannibal's tactics at Cannae as the archetype of a perfect double envelopment. Armies throughout history have aspired to replicate this feat of surrounding and annihilating a numerically superior enemy. Cannae became shorthand for the ultimate tactical triumph, an achievement that has rarely been equaled in any era. The battle also underscored the strategic limitations of a single victory, however colossal, if not exploited for immediate political gain. For Hannibal, the brilliance displayed on that August day stands as one of the greatest military achievements in human history. To fully appreciate the scope of Hannibal's triumph at Cannae, it is essential to consider the psychological as well as the physical aspects of warfare at that time. Roman soldiers had been drilled to advance aggressively, confident that their methodical formations would crush any foe. The Carthaginians, including Iberian, Gallic, and Numidian contingents, were well aware of Roman discipline. But Hannibal knew that armies are made up of men with fears, hopes, and doubts. By controlling the unfolding of the engagement, using feigned retreats, luring the Romans into his center, and orchestrating swift cavalry maneuvers, he exploited the emotional state of the Roman foot soldiers. When they realized they were surrounded, fear escalated into panic, turning an ordered legion into a writhing mass of despair. The Carthaginian commander also skillfully leveraged the cultural and fighting styles of his diverse troops. The Gauls, for instance, were famously bold and prone to frontal assaults, while the Iberians could execute disciplined formations. The African infantry, Hannibal's backbone, was drilled in the Roman style, armed with captured or replicated Roman equipment. His cavalry was unmatched, from heavily armed Spanish and Gallic horsemen to the swift Numidians adept at skirmishing tactics. Every unit had a role to play at Cannae, and Hannibal's command knit them into a cohesive whole capable of a complex maneuver rarely seen in antiquity. For Rome, the psychological blow was devastating. News of the staggering casualties darkened the city. Livy, one of Rome's historians, records how the city fell into a hushed dread, shops closing, families fearing for their loved ones. The Roman sense of invincibility had been shaken to its core. Politically, some voices called for negotiation with Carthage. Yet, the Roman Senate, led by figures like Marcus Claudius Marcellus and Fabius Maximus, rose to the challenge. Laws were passed to ensure a swift mustering of new soldiers. Wealthy citizens made large loans to the state. Even the practice of mourning was curtailed so that families could not paralyze the city with prolonged funerals. In its darkest hour, Rome displayed the resilience and adaptability that would ultimately propel it to dominate the Mediterranean world. In Carthage, the news of Hannibal's monumental victory was greeted with celebration, but also caution. The Carthaginian elite had different factions, some of whom doubted Hannibal or feared committing massive resources to his cause. Recall that Carthage had been largely a naval power. The idea of sustaining a land-based conflict in Italy for an extended period was costly, especially with the Roman fleet still a potent force. Hannibal sent envoys requesting reinforcements and siege equipment, hoping to press the advantage. Yet Carthage's oligarchy hedged, perhaps underestimating how close Rome was to collapse, or perhaps protecting its own interests in Iberia. Whatever the reasons, Hannibal did not receive the support he needed, to transform the victory at Cannae into Rome's submission. In the years that followed, the war turned into a protracted struggle. Hannibal's bold forays saw him roam Italy, establishing alliances with cities like Capua, which briefly switched allegiance. But Roman generals, adopting Fabian tactics, refused to give battle unless victory seemed attainable. This strategy denied Hannibal the chance to replicate Cannae's success on a grand scale. Meanwhile, Rome dispatched generals like the Scipios to Iberia, where they worked to cut off Carthage's supply lines and allies. Though initial Roman efforts in Iberia were mixed, the rise of Publius Cornelius Scipio, later Scipio Africanus, shifted the balance. By 206 BC, Carthage's power in Iberia was effectively broken, undermining Hannibal's position in Italy. The final act came when Scipio Africanus invaded North Africa, near Carthage itself. This forced Hannibal to return home for the defense of the city. At the Battle of Zama in 202 BC, Scipio, using lessons learned from Hannibal's own tactics, secured a decisive Roman victory. Hannibal, now in the unenviable position of a defender with fewer resources, could not replicate his earlier brilliance. Carthage was forced to negotiate peace on harsh terms, ending the Second Punic War. Despite this ultimate defeat, Hannibal's reputation as one of the greatest generals in history remains unchallenged. And no single battle stands out more prominently than Cannae, an event that continues to fascinate scholars and soldiers alike. Military theorists such as Karl von Clausewitz, Antoine-Henri Jomini, and later Basil Liddell Hart scrutinized Cannae, seeing it as a paragon of operational art. The concept of encirclement and the decisive destruction of the enemy's main force has inspired campaigns into the modern era. The double envelopment at Cannae transcended its ancient context, shaping doctrines of maneuver warfare that would see application in conflicts millennia removed from the Roman legionary lines. Even modern armies use the term Cannae to describe a complete and total victory achieved through strategic envelopment. For the Romans themselves, the humiliating memory of Cannae fueled a relentless drive for reform and discipline. After 216 BC, the Roman army saw various structural changes. Among them, a willingness to adopt more flexible tactics. The massive levies raised in the wake of the disaster introduced fresh blood into the legions, accompanied by a sense of solemn duty. Every soldier knew the story of Cannae, and none wished to see it repeated. The state's vow never to yield, even in the face of catastrophic defeats, became a key element of Roman identity. Over time, this unwavering determination allowed Rome to build a vast empire stretching from Britain to Asia Minor, from North Africa to the Rhine. Yet one might argue that no Roman triumph, not even the final victory at Zama, ever quite eclipsed the fear and awe that Hannibal conjured at Cannae. The scale of Rome's losses and the completeness of their defeat left an indelible mark. Anecdotes abound of Roman senators falling in battle, patrician families losing multiple heirs, and entire segments of Roman society decimated. Many believed, some in hushed tones, others openly, that if Hannibal had marched on Rome immediately after Cannae, he might well have forced the city's surrender. This belief, whether entirely justified or not, ensured that Hannibal's name lived on in Roman lore as the ghost who haunted their darkest nightmares. Cannae is also a story of how leadership can shape fate. Hannibal's personal qualities, his courage, his adaptability, his capacity for empathy with diverse cultures in his army, carved a path for an under-resourced Carthaginian force to nearly break the will of the mightiest republic of the age. His leadership style emphasized respect for his troops, many of whom had followed him from Iberia, across the Alps, and into the heart of Italy. Conversely, the Roman leadership at Cannae was divided. Paulus was a seasoned soldier but cautious. Varro was reckless and eager for glory. The lack of unity at the top ranks of the Roman command structure contributed to the catastrophic outcome. Had the consuls agreed on a strategy more akin to Fabius Maximus's approach, they might have avoided such an irreversible debacle. Their inability to coordinate, fueled by political pressures and personal rivalries, played directly into Hannibal's hands. On a human level, the battle was as tragic as it was decisive. Tens of thousands lost their lives in the scorching August heat. The aftermath was gruesome. The fields littered with Roman soldiers, many left unburied for days. Survivors were captured, some sold into slavery. Roman historians speak of the sorrow that enveloped the city when news arrived. Families waiting anxiously for loved ones who would never return. Across Italy, panic ensued. Cities that had stood faithfully with Rome wondered if Hannibal would soon appear at their gates. For those on the cusp, the tide seemed to favor Carthage. Some changed allegiance, hoping to be on the winning side of history. But Cannae, for all its brutality, was also a crucible for renewal. Rome's society, tested to the core, found a depth of resolve that few had anticipated. This unwavering determination is, in many ways, as central to the story as Hannibal's brilliance. In the years that followed, the Romans methodically recaptured lost territory, renewed alliances, and chipped away at Carthage's broader empire, until Hannibal stood virtually alone. Ultimately, the war's outcome was shaped by logistics, alliances, and strategic expansions, areas in which Rome excelled due to its resilient republican structure. Even Hannibal, with all his genius, could not indefinitely stand against the resources of an aroused Roman republic. Still, long after the close of the Second Punic War, soldiers and statesmen evoked Cannae as a warning and a lesson. The Roman general Julius Caesar, for instance, studied Hannibal's campaigns. Centuries later, Napoleon Bonaparte marveled at the sophistication of Hannibal's maneuvers. In the 20th century, German strategist Alfred von Schlieffen devised the famous Schlieffen Plan, aspiring to recreate a modern Cannae on the Western Front. The aspirations and references continue because Cannae is more than an ancient battle. It is a timeless masterpiece of tactics, an exploration of how intellect and courage can triumph over numerical odds. One could argue that Cannae also underscores the idea that tactical brilliance alone does not guarantee strategic victory. While Hannibal orchestrated one of history's most brilliant battles, Carthage as a whole did not mobilize effectively in the grander sense. Rome, conversely, despite being bloodied at Cannae, found the will and resources to prosecute the war on multiple fronts, eventually crushing Carthage's capacity to sustain Hannibal. Therefore, Cannae serves as a reminder that a single triumph, no matter how glorious, must be integrated into a broader strategy and supported by political and economic power. Without that integration, even the most spectacular battlefield success can slip through a general's fingers. As the dust of Cannae settled and the ground soaked with the blood of tens of thousands, Hannibal's men likely gazed in awe at the magnitude of what they had achieved. The Carthaginian leader would have known deep down that while he had struck a monumental blow, the war was not over. Perhaps he deliberated on the next steps, anticipating that new armies would rise from Rome's seemingly endless well of manpower. He might have wondered how he could convince more Italian allies to join the Carthaginian cause, or whether Carthage itself would send the supplies and reinforcements he needed. In that brief moment, as the sun set over the fields of Cannae, Hannibal stood at the pinnacle of military genius, yet on the precipice of uncertainty, a victor with the might of Rome still looming in the distance. The broader significance of Cannae became fully apparent only with time. As word of the battle spread throughout the Mediterranean, states and kingdoms viewed Rome with equal parts fascination and caution. Some saw an opportunity to break away from the Roman sphere. Others hesitated, aware that the Roman spirit was not extinguished. The Second Punic War continued for another decade and a half, with fortunes swinging back and forth. Ultimately, the tide favored Rome under the inspired leadership of generals like Scipio Africanus. Carthage's final defeat ushered in a period of Roman expansion that would eventually transform the entire Mediterranean into a Roman lake. And yet, when Roman soldiers and statesmen recounted the darkest days of their republic, they always returned to Cannae. In the centuries that followed, the once fearsome Carthage diminished into historical memory. The city was razed by Rome in the Third Punic War, 149 to 146 BC, and a new Roman city arose on its ashes. Meanwhile, Rome prospered and morphed into an empire ruled by emperors, overshadowing the republican structures of Hannibal's time. Historians, Polybius, Livy, and later Appian, recorded the wars between Rome and Carthage, carefully documenting Hannibal's campaigns. They argued about whether Carthage could have won if it had provided more resources or if Hannibal had taken different strategic gambits after Cannae. Such debates echo through academic circles even today. Yet, for all the analysis, no retelling of Cannae can dilute its raw, visceral drama. The stifling heat of the Apulian plain, the thunderous advance of tens of thousands of Roman soldiers, the desperate cries of men realizing they were ensnared, the triumphant roars of Hannibal's army when the Roman lines collapsed. In that crucible of fear and courage, Hannibal's name became immortal. The concept of a Cannae-like victory took root, an ideal of total annihilation, of the smaller, weaker force using intellect and cunning to overwhelm a far larger one. Generals and tacticians throughout history yearned for their own Cannae, some achieving partial echoes, others failing miserably. The lesson remained that victory at such a scale often hinges on more than just a brilliant plan. It demands precise timing, discipline, leadership, and the capacity to manipulate the enemy's expectations. One of the final notes in this grand tapestry is the enduring human narrative of defiance in the face of greater power. Hannibal's plan to invade Italy was audacious from its inception. Detractors in Carthage called it mad. Many Roman observers believed it impossible. Yet Hannibal's crossing of the Alps demonstrated his unbreakable determination. Cannae was the culmination of that defiance, turning the tables on a seemingly invincible Roman war machine. Though Carthage did not ultimately prevail in the war, Hannibal's crusade stands as a testament to what a single individual, guided by vision and fueled by personal vendetta, can accomplish against the largest obstacles. Thus, Cannae endures as a symbol of brilliance and brutality, victory and defeat, the fortunes of war and the tides of history. The day the Carthaginians encircled and annihilated the Romans remains one of the most studied events in military lore, a testament to Hannibal's artistry on the battlefield. And while Rome eventually rose anew, stronger and more determined, the memory of Cannae would forever remind them of their vulnerability. Even as the centuries marched on and empires rose and fell, The dusty fields near the ancient town of Cannae would forever whisper the tale of Hannibal's masterpiece, echoing across the ages as an unforgettable lesson in the art of war.